The frozen road stretched endlessly beneath a snow-laden sky. The thermometer read 25 degrees Fahrenheit, and the howling wind made the temperature feel even colder. Drivers sped along, their cars kicking up slush, eager to escape the brutal cold. But none of them noticed what was standing on the side of the road, a grizzly bear, thin and shivering. The bear stood motionless near the highway, his fur matted with ice and his ribs pressing against his skin, evidence of hunger. His dark eyes followed each passing car, filled with something rare, not aggression, not fear, but hope. What was he waiting for? For hours, the bear stood there, watching, waiting. His legs trembled with exhaustion, his breath visible in the frigid air, until finally, a miracle happened. What had driven this starving creature to such desperation? Why had he been abandoned in the freezing cold, far from the depths of the forest where he belonged? And most importantly, who would stop and help him? This story will break your heart, but it will also restore your faith in compassion, survival, and the bond between humans and nature. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss another powerful story like this one. Now, let's dive into this incredible journey of survival and second chances. The icy wind howled through the barren landscape, sweeping across the snow-covered highway like an invisible force determined to freeze everything in its path. The road, slick with patches of black ice, stretched endlessly into the horizon, disappearing into the thick fog that had settled over the wilderness. It was 25 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature so brutal that even the breath of passing cars turned into thick clouds that vanished almost instantly. Drivers focused on the road ahead, eager to reach their destinations, not sparing a glance at the shadow that stood near the edge of the forest. But if they had looked, they would have seen him. A brown bear, frail and trembling, stood motionless by the highway, his dark eyes following every vehicle that passed. His fur, once thick and golden brown, was now dull and stiff with frost. His ribs pressed against his skin, evidence of starvation, and his breath came out in slow, painful clouds, as if every exhale took more energy than he could afford to lose. He wasn't lost. He wasn't confused. He was waiting. But waiting for what? The bear's body swayed as exhaustion threatened to pull him to the ground, but he remained standing, his focus locked onto the streaks of light passing him by. His stomach ached with an emptiness he had never known before. Hunger was a familiar enemy, but this time it felt different. He wasn't sure if he would survive it. Further down the road, Daniel Carter gripped the steering wheel of his pickup truck, his knuckles white as he fought against the icy conditions. A seasoned wildlife rescuer, he had spent the last decade answering distress calls for injured animals, but nothing prepared him for what he was about to see. A dark figure in the distance. At first, Daniel thought it was just another tree weighed down by snow, an illusion caused by the thick fog. But as he got closer, his pulse quickened. It wasn't a tree. It wasn't debris. It was a bear. Daniel's foot hovered over the brake, instincts clashing with logic. Stopping on an icy highway was dangerous, but something in the way the bear stood, still, shivering, just watching the road, made his stomach twist. Most wild animals feared humans. Most would run. But this one didn't. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't charging toward the cars. He was waiting. Daniel swallowed hard and made a decision that no one else had made that night. He pulled his truck to the side of the road. The bear's ears flicked at the sound of the engine slowing down, but he didn't move. His legs were locked in place as if he had been standing there for hours. Daniel turned off his headlights and slowly stepped out into the cold. The wind cut through his jacket instantly, and his boots crunched against the ice-covered ground. His breath caught in his throat as he got a better look at the animal. The bear's fur was tangled with frozen clumps of snow and ice. His face was gaunt, his once powerful muscles wasted away. His eyes. They were the worst part. They were filled with pain. Daniel raised his hand slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hey there, buddy. I'm not here to hurt you." The bear blinked slowly, his ears twitching. He didn't growl. He didn't move. He just stared. Daniel took a cautious step forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. Every instinct told him to be careful, but something deeper, something human, told him that this bear wasn't a threat. This bear was desperate. Daniel's mind raced. What could have happened? How did this bear end up so close to the road? Where was his family? Then he saw it. The deep scars on the bear's shoulders. The torn patches of fur. This bear had been in a fight. Or worse, someone had done this to him. Daniel clenched his jaw. Someone had abandoned this bear. And now, with nowhere else to go, he had turned to the only thing he could think of: humans. The other cars continued to rush past, ignoring the heartbreaking sight on the side of the road. But Daniel wasn't going to ignore it. He took another step closer, reaching into his truck for a blanket. The bear's legs finally gave out. Daniel lunged forward. He wasn't going to let this bear die here. Not tonight. Not while he was watching. Daniel's heart pounded as he watched the bear collapse onto the frozen ground, his body too weak to hold itself up any longer. His breath hitched in the icy air, forming a visible cloud in front of him. He had to act fast. The bear let out a slow, painful exhale, his ribs rising and falling in a shaky rhythm. He was alive. But barely. Daniel hesitated for only a second before springing into action. He ripped off his gloves and grabbed the thick emergency blanket from the back of his truck. He knew he was taking a risk. A wild bear, even a weak one, could still be dangerous, but deep down, he felt something he couldn't explain. This bear wasn't a threat, he was pleading for help. Daniel crouched a few feet away, carefully observing the animal's condition. The bear's fur, once thick and majestic, was now coated in frost and patches of dirt. His breath came in short, exhausted puffs, and the deep scars on his shoulder hinted at a brutal past. Daniel's mind raced with possibilities. Had he been attacked by another bear? Had he escaped a hunter's trap? Or worse, had a human done this to him? He forced himself to push those thoughts aside. Right now, the bear was dying, and Daniel was the only one who could stop it. Slowly, Daniel extended the blanket. "Easy there, buddy. I'm just here to help," he murmured, his voice calm and steady. The bear didn't move. He barely even blinked. Daniel took that as a sign. He inched forward and carefully draped the blanket over the bear's frail body. Still nothing, no growl, no attempt to flee, no aggression. Daniel's stomach twisted. A healthy bear would have fought, would have reacted. But this one, he had lost his fight. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a protein bar. It wasn't much, but it was something. He unwrapped it and gently placed it a few inches from the bear's snout. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the bear twitched. His dry nose twitched at the unfamiliar scent. His weak body barely reacted, but his instincts hadn't completely faded. Daniel held his breath as he saw the bear's cracked tongue peek out, just barely touching the food. Then, with a slow, painful movement, he took the smallest bite. Daniel exhaled in relief. It was a start. But now came the real challenge. Daniel couldn't leave the bear here. If he did, the cold would kill him before morning. He had two options: call for backup and wait, hoping the bear would survive the night, or try to get the bear into his truck and take him somewhere safe. An insane idea that could easily end in disaster. Daniel clenched his jaw. He had to try. Taking a deep breath, he grabbed the emergency rope from his truck. He wasn't planning to tie the bear up, but he needed something to gently guide him. Daniel crouched down again. "Come on, buddy, we gotta get you out of here." He placed the rope loosely around the bear's massive body, hoping the pressure would encourage movement. For a terrifying moment, the bear did nothing. Then, his eyes flickered open. Daniel took a step back as the bear shifted, his muscles trembling. The moment stretched on forever as the giant creature made his first attempt to stand. One paw. Then another. Slow, weak, but moving. Daniel swallowed hard. For the first time that night, he felt something dangerous rise in his chest. Hope. But they weren't safe yet. The hardest part was still ahead. Would the bear trust him enough to follow? Would he survive the journey? Or was Daniel about to risk everything for a dying animal that had already given up? The freezing wind howled through the desolate road as Daniel watched the bear struggle to stay upright. The creature trembled beneath the emergency blanket, his body swaying as if every breath cost him more strength than he had left. Daniel knew this was a dangerous gamble. The bear was still wild, still unpredictable. If he suddenly lashed out in fear, Daniel wouldn't stand a chance. But looking into the animal's eyes, hollow, exhausted, pleading, he knew one thing for sure. This bear didn't want to fight. He just wanted to live. Daniel took another step back, giving the bear space to move. "Come on, big guy," he coaxed, his voice barely audible over the wind. "I know you're hurting, but we can't stay here." The bear hesitated, his breath visible in the icy air. His front paw lifted off the ground, then collapsed. His body was too weak to support him. Daniel's gut clenched. The bear was dying. He had minutes, maybe seconds, before it was too late. He had to act now. Daniel looked at his truck, the only place warm enough to keep the bear alive. But how was he supposed to move a creature this size? There was only one option left. He had to lift him. His stomach tightened at the insanity of the idea. The bear easily weighed 4 times his size, a collapsed wall of frozen muscle and fur. But if he could support his weight just enough to get him moving, it was worth the risk. Daniel braced himself. He crouched low, gripping the thick fur near the bear's shoulders. He expected a struggle, maybe a weak growl. But there was nothing. The bear was too tired to resist. With all his strength, Daniel pushed against the frozen ground and heaved the bear upward. His muscles screamed in protest, but he ignored the pain. The bear staggered, slipping. But Daniel didn't let go. "Come on, buddy," he gasped. "I've got you." For a moment, it seemed impossible. The bear swayed, his massive frame on the verge of collapsing again. Then, his legs locked. He wasn't standing tall, but he was standing. Daniel sucked in a sharp breath, his heart pounding in his chest. The bear was moving. Barely. But he was moving. Step by step, Daniel guided the bear toward the truck. The frozen ground was slick with ice, and every step felt like a battle against the impossible. The bear stumbled. Daniel caught him. The bear faltered. Daniel steadied him. He refused to let this creature fall. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the back of the truck. Daniel let out a ragged breath, but now came the hardest part. How was he supposed to get the bear inside? Daniel wiped sweat from his brow despite the freezing air. He knew time was running out. The bear's movements were growing slower, weaker. If he collapsed now, it would be over. Daniel had to think fast. He sprinted to the truck, flinging open the back. His supplies were still there, his hunting tarp, a heavy-duty rope, and a steel ramp he used for loading heavy equipment. It would have to do. Working fast, Daniel laid out the tarp and tied the rope to the truck's interior. He would have to use the ramp to slide the bear in. He turned back to the animal, still trembling on unsteady legs. "All right, big guy," Daniel muttered. "This is going to be tough." He grabbed the tarp and positioned it beneath the bear. Inch by inch, every movement felt like a battle, but slowly, carefully, he pulled the bear onto it. The bear let out a weak groan but didn't fight. Daniel's arms burned as he braced himself for the final push. This was it, one last effort. With every ounce of strength, Daniel pulled. The bear slid up the ramp, his massive weight nearly dragging Daniel down with him. The rope dug into his palms, his muscles screamed, and for a second, it felt hopeless. Then, with one last pull, the bear collapsed into the truck bed. Daniel stumbled backward, gasping for breath. He had done it. The bear lay still, his breath shallow but steady. He was alive. But they weren't safe yet. Daniel jumped into the driver's seat, his hands shaking as he turned the key. The truck roared to life. There was only one place that could save the bear now, the nearest wildlife rehabilitation center. Daniel gripped the steering wheel and slammed his foot onto the gas. The bear had fought this long, now it was Daniel's turn to fight for him. The truck roared down the desolate highway, its tires cutting through the snow-covered asphalt. The blizzard had eased slightly, but the temperature remained brutal, -25 degrees and dropping. Inside the truck bed, the half-frozen grizzly bear lay motionless, wrapped in Daniel's emergency tarp. His breaths were shallow, his fur coated in a thin layer of ice, each exhale a whisper of steam in the freezing air. Daniel stole a glance in the rearview mirror. The bear was alive, but for how long? His fingers clenched tighter around the wheel. He had to make it in time. The nearest wildlife rehabilitation center was over an hour away. That was assuming the roads weren't blocked by ice or fallen trees. Daniel reached for his radio and adjusted the frequency, his pulse pounding in his ears. "This is Ranger Daniel Carter. I need immediate clearance for emergency transport. I have a severely hypothermic grizzly in critical condition." Static. He gritted his teeth. "Come on, someone pick up." Then, a response. "Ranger Carter, this is Yukon Wildlife Rescue." "Did you say a grizzly?" "Yes." "A juvenile, barely clinging to life." Silence. Then, urgency. "What's the ETA?" Daniel's hands tightened on the wheel. 50 minutes, if I push it." "Damn. The vet's on standby. Get here as fast as you can." Daniel slammed the gas pedal. The bear shifted slightly, a weak groan escaping his throat. Daniel's heart leapt, he was still responding. He glanced back, speaking to him as if he could understand. "Hang in there, big guy. You've made it this far." The bear's chest rose and fell in uneven rhythms. His body was fighting, but Daniel knew the cold was relentless. It wouldn't stop until it drained every ounce of life from the animal. The truck hit a patch of black ice, sliding. Daniel's stomach lurched. He yanked the wheel, correcting the spin just in time. His knuckles were white from gripping it so hard. Every second counted. Minutes passed, each one stretching into eternity. Then, a horrifying realization. The bear's breathing slowed. His body shuddered violently, then went still. No, 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 no. Stay with me. Daniel shouted. His mind raced. Hypothermia. His body was shutting down. He couldn't let that happen. Daniel made a split-second decision, one that went against every rule of dealing with wild animals. He stopped the truck. Jumping out, he ran to the back and threw open the tailgate. The freezing wind sliced through him, but he didn't care. The bear was on the brink. Without hesitation, Daniel climbed into the truck bed, his hands shaking as he checked for any movement, any sign of life. Nothing. His gut clenched. He had to act. Instinct kicked in. Daniel reached for his own jacket, ripping it off. Despite the brutal cold, he threw it over the bear, then pressed his body against the massive creature, trying to transfer heat. He had no idea if it would work. All he knew was that he had to try. His breaths came in sharp gasps. He could feel how cold the bear's body was. It was unnatural, like he was touching a block of ice instead of a living being. Daniel clenched his jaw. I swear to God, you're not dying on me. Then, a twitch. A small movement in the bear's paw. Daniel's heart leapt. That's it, big guy. Come on. Another shudder. The bear gasped, a weak, rattling breath, but a breath nonetheless. Relief flooded through Daniel. He wasn't giving up yet. Daniel jumped out of the truck bed, his body numb from the cold. He climbed back into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut. Hold on, buddy. We're almost there. The engine roared as he pushed the truck past 70 miles per hour, barreling down the icy road like a man possessed. Then, a sign. Yukon Wildlife Rescue, 10 miles ahead. He was going to make it. Daniel's heart pounded as he pulled into the center's entrance. A team of veterinarians and wildlife specialists were already outside, waiting. As soon as he stopped, they rushed to the truck. One of the vets, Dr. Elizabeth Monroe, snapped into action. How long has he been like this? She asked, assessing the bear's vitals. Daniel exhaled, his breath fogging in the icy air. He crashed on the way. I tried to keep him warm, but he's barely hanging on. Dr. Monroe nodded, her expression grim. Let's get him inside, now. They worked fast, securing the bear on a stretcher and moving him toward the heated emergency facility. Daniel followed, his chest tight with anxiety. Would he make it? Or had he fought this hard only to lose him now? Inside Yukon Wildlife Rescue, the room buzzed with urgency. The bear was lifted onto an emergency examination table, his body still dangerously cold to the touch. Daniel stood back, his breath unsteady as he watched the veterinarians work with laser focus. Vitals are weak, Dr. Monroe announced, pressing a stethoscope to the bear's chest. He's in severe hypothermic shock. We need to act now, or we'll lose him. Daniel's hands curled into tight fists. He had risked everything to get the bear here. He couldn't let him slip away now. Let's start warming him up gradually. No sudden temperature increases, or we risk organ failure, another vet, Dr. Harris, instructed. Heat lamps flickered on. Warm blankets were carefully layered over the bear's massive frame. One vet hooked up and 4, delivering heated fluids into his veins. Despite their efforts, the bear remained unresponsive. His breathing was shallow, erratic. Daniel's chest tightened. Had they been too late? He had been in this situation before. Years ago, another animal had needed his help, a young wolf caught in a poacher's trap. Daniel had done everything right. He had freed the creature, brought it to safety. But it hadn't made it. The memory haunted him. And now he was standing in a room where history threatened to repeat itself. No, Daniel whispered under his breath. He refused to let this bear die. Minutes dragged into eternity. Then, a flicker of movement. The bear's paw twitched. Dr. Monroe noticed immediately. "Did you see that?" Daniel stepped closer, his heart pounding. The bear's breathing was changing. It was still shallow, but it had rhythm now. It was a fight, but the bear was still in it. Then, his eyes fluttered open. A weak, hazy gaze scanned the room. Daniel's breath hitched. The bear was alive. He was aware. For the first time since he had found him on that frozen roadside, there was hope. "He's still critical," Dr. Monroe reminded them. "We have to monitor him carefully." Daniel nodded. He knew the battle wasn't over. The bear had a long road ahead. Dr. Harris examined his fur, grimacing. "Frostbite damage is bad. We might need to treat infected areas surgically." Daniel exhaled sharply. The bear had survived the cold, but what about the damage left behind? Would he ever be strong enough to return to the wild, or had the elements stolen that from him forever? Daniel couldn't explain it, but something about this bear felt different. Maybe it was the way the animal had locked eyes with him. Or the way he had trusted Daniel enough to let him help. Either way, he wasn't leaving. Not until he knew the bear was going to make it. So, he pulled up a chair next to the enclosure, folded his arms, and prepared for a long night. He wasn't just a ranger. He was this bear's last chance. The rescue center was silent except for the steady beeping of the monitors attached to the bear's fragile body. Daniel sat by the enclosure, his arms crossed, exhaustion settling into his bones. It had been 24 hours since the bear had arrived, and although he was alive, his condition was still critical. Dr. Monroe entered the room, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "How's he doing?" Daniel gestured toward the bear. His breathing was steadier, but he still wasn't moving much. His massive paws, usually so strong, remained limp. "He's fighting," Daniel said. "But I don't know if he has enough left in him." Dr. Monroe walked up to the cage and observed the animal's pale, cracked nose, his frostbitten ears, the once powerful muscles now weakened from starvation. She sighed. "He's been through hell," she murmured. Daniel clenched his jaw. Who could do this? Who could abandon an animal like this in the middle of a frozen highway? Dr. Monroe hesitated. Then, after a long pause, she said, "I think I know." Daniel's brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" Dr. Monroe pulled out a file from her bag and placed it on the table. 2 months ago, we got a report about an illegal roadside zoo being shut down in northern Canada. Many of the animals were rescued, but some were never found. Daniel's stomach dropped. He flipped through the photos in the file, rusty cages, a rundown facility, malnourished animals, and then a familiar sight. A photo of a brown bear chained to a post, his eyes haunted, his body frail. Daniel's hands tightened into fists. "This is him," he whispered. Dr. Monroe nodded. We think some of the animals were secretly dumped when the operation was raided. Instead of rehoming them, the owners likely abandoned them to fend for themselves. Daniel felt rage boil inside him. The bear wasn't just left behind, he had been discarded like trash. And yet, despite all the suffering, despite the cold and starvation, he had fought to survive. Daniel pushed away the file and stood up. He walked over to the bear's enclosure and crouched beside him. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "You've been through a lot, huh?" The bear's eyes fluttered open. Daniel's breath caught. It was the first time the bear had looked at him with true awareness. For the first time, Daniel saw something other than pain in those deep brown eyes. He saw recognition. "We need to try feeding him," Dr. Monroe said. Daniel grabbed a bowl of soft food and carefully placed it inside the enclosure. At first, the bear didn't move. Then, a twitch of his nose. Slowly, he stretched his weak neck forward and took the smallest bite. Daniel exhaled, relief washing over him. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "He's going to make it," Dr. Monroe whispered. For the first time since this all began, Daniel believed it too. But there was still one big question left. Even if the bear recovered, would he ever be able to return to the wild? Or had his time in captivity stolen that from him forever? Daniel wasn't sure. But one thing was certain, he would do everything in his power to make sure this bear never suffered again. And if that meant staying by his side for as long as it took, then so be it. For weeks, the bear remained under the care of Daniel and Dr. Monroe. Each day was a battle, but slowly, signs of improvement began to show. The frostbite on his ears healed, his fur began to grow back, and the haunted look in his eyes faded. The biggest milestone came on a quiet morning when Daniel arrived to check on him and found the enclosure empty. His heart pounded. Had something gone wrong? Had he somehow escaped? Then, a rustling in the nearby trees. Daniel turned, and there he was. The bear stood at the edge of the sanctuary, his massive body strong again, his eyes clear and full of life. For the first time, Daniel truly saw him for what he was, a survivor. Dr. Monroe walked up beside Daniel, watching the bear carefully. "We need to decide," she said. "Is he ready to go back?" Daniel's chest tightened. The wild was his home. But after all he'd been through, would it ever truly be safe for him again? The scars on his body told a different story. "If we keep him here, he'll be protected," Daniel murmured. "But keeping a wild animal in captivity when he's capable of freedom, it wouldn't be fair." Dr. Monroe nodded. "We could release him in a protected reserve," she suggested. "Somewhere he won't be hunted. He'll have space to roam, but he won't be alone." Daniel looked at the bear, who had now settled under a tree, watching them both calmly. It was almost as if he was waiting for their decision. A week later, the day of release arrived. Daniel drove deep into the protected forest reserve, an area far from human settlements, rich in rivers, food, and shelter. The bear had grown stronger than they could have ever hoped. As Daniel opened the large transport cage, he felt a strange mix of emotions. For months, this bear had been his responsibility, his fight, his friend. But now, it was time to let him go. The bear stepped forward, sniffing the fresh air. Then, slowly, he took his first steps into the wild. Daniel expected him to run, to disappear into the trees without looking back. But instead, he paused, turning his massive head. The bear looked directly at Daniel, and in that moment, no words were needed. The bear held his gaze for a long, quiet moment. Then, without hesitation, he turned and disappeared into the wilderness. Daniel stood there for a long time, watching until the bear was gone. Dr. Monroe placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did good," she said softly. Daniel exhaled, feeling a weight lift from his chest. It wasn't just about saving a life, it was about giving him a second chance. And for the first time in a long while, Daniel truly believed he had made a difference. If this story touched your heart, remember, compassion and courage can change even the most hopeless situations. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who believes in second chances.